Joining us now, speaking of one of those problems, is the Middle East. And we're going to be joined. You remember last week we had a young woman on who's a law student, and she gave us her perspective on the Middle East. And we have another one from an organization called Young Voices. And joining us right now is Jill Jacobson, who's a third-year law student at Boston College Law School. And she's got a master's as well in international relations from Northeastern. So she's all over this stuff, and we're excited to have you here, Jill. So thanks for joining us on WTIC. Hello there, Jill.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. It's fun that there's an organization trying to push young people like yourself out there. What is the reason, though, to have young people out there? What can you offer as perspective that's unique?
Certainly. I mean, I think in general, young voices are, for better or for worse, the future of our people. We are the younger generation. And I think with this issue particularly, we are seeing some astounding responses to what's going on in the Middle East across university and law school campuses in the United States that are frankly concerning.
I'm glad you brought that up. What is going on?
Certainly. So where we would normally expect a nuanced take on foreign relations, we are seeing brazen support for terrorism. In the wake of the attacks against the Israeli people by Hamas, we're seeing supportive statements of the actions by Hamas on both university and law school campuses.
Why do you say that is hate speech, essentially, is what you're saying? Why is that hate speech as opposed to, because I think they would argue that they're just trying to get another perspective out there?
I think a line has to be drawn between political or foreign relations commentary on the dispute between Israel and Palestine that has been going on for many, many years, and commentary on the terrorist attacks by Hamas. We are seeing direct responses to the terrorist attacks in isolation, in days, sometimes hours, just after the attacks, that seem to suggest that those acts of terrorism were somehow morally justified or politically necessary, which is a very frightening distinction, I think.
It also feels to me that that something that's very complex, this issue in the Middle East has been going on for 75 years in the modern era, but thousands of years there have been controversies and there are feelings going back to all these historical events. It feels to me like they're putting it into simple binary politics, and they just want to pick one side or the other, and they're picking the side that you can't imagine why they would pick that side. Where would young people be getting that interpretation of things?
I think you rightly point out that this issue is one of the most complicated and nuanced of all dynamics in the Middle East, which makes it so surprising that statements by these student groups are very superficial and again, not siding with who you might expect. I think the main reason for this is a lot of the dominant frameworks that are taught in academia today feature an oppressor and an oppressed. And the oppressor looks a certain way and the oppressed looks a certain way. And while there are some historical analogs that support the dynamic that they might be learning, that is not a blanket framework that can be mapped onto every situation that one confronts in the world.
Wait a sec, Jill. So you're saying that they're doing this by skin color and darker people get the nod?
I wouldn't say it is directly that, but I think they're taught to analyze current events in terms of an oppressor and an oppressed. And that leaves very, very little room for nuance, which we see here in their commentary.
But they could just look at Jews and say Jews have always been oppressed.
They certainly could, which makes you wonder why the commentary is the way it is. I think it is that in conjunction with younger people's proclivity towards activism as a political movement. I think they look to a lot of activists who perhaps are in support of the Palestinian cause, and that allows them to wholeheartedly support anything that might be in furtherance of that, even if it's extremely violent and is perpetuated by terrorists.
We're talking to Jill Jacobson. She's in her third year of law school at Boston College Law and also has a master's in international relations from Northeastern University. So it seems, Jill, and we're discussing the Middle East and why colleges seem to be splitting. Student bodies seem to be having an inclination to side with the terrorists in this particular event who performed horrifying acts as a way to express themselves. And we're trying to get a handle on why it is young people are cutting this way. It seems to me that they make themselves look younger and more naive by doing this, that they're unprepared for this stage, it looks.
The statements by these students are abhorrent. They cannot be excused. But I will say, to their credit, they are employing a lot of the frameworks that they're taught in school. You have to remember that we're living in a cancel culture era where people are very hesitant to make controversial statements. I think a lot of these students thought that they were expressing the orthodoxy, that these statements would be accepted, and were frankly surprised when the backlash inevitably came from the general public.
So they're a little intimidated because they're young, and they're also following what their radical left-wing professors, and really it's not about individual professors because it seems like it's a unified message that's not just on a single campus, but on all the campuses. Is that a fair way to assess it, or are we overreacting?
No, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, I can give you an anecdotal example of this, which is that the study of decolonization efforts as a concept is pretty ubiquitous on college and graduate campuses. But decolonization is violent, right?
Well, hang on. I'm not sure we know what that word means. It's part of the jargon, apparently, at the college level. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. So decolonization, the process of removing the current residents of an area and returning the indigenous people to that area, that involves physical movement of people, right, who perhaps have been there for generations, even
and who
longer.
might not want to be moved.
Precisely. And I think in classrooms, we sometimes lose sight of that, and we advocate for concepts like decolonization sort of flippantly without realizing the gravity that would befall the actual residents of those areas.
Oh, you mean it's offered up as a solution without much compassion?
Yes, I think that's a dominant theme in many of these statements and wider commentary about this issue in general on university campuses.
So when you say the students are to be commended because they're following their lessons, you're saying they've received distorted, biased, hateful lessons in the schools that their families are paying 50 or 60 or 80 grand a year, and they're taking out loans, and they're going to be in debt for a generation for. And they're learning this stupid anti-American stuff at the places that everybody's investing so much in.
I wouldn't say they should be commended. I think the educational system is rewarding them for doing what they should, which is applying the frameworks that they learn while they're in the classroom. And, I'm not sure that in and of itself, these frameworks are anti-American. I just think they're superficial. They leave very little room for nuance, so that when students actually go to apply the frameworks that they've learned to real-life situations like this, there's very little room for movement. They sort of have to adopt the orthodoxy that they're hearing wholesale, even if it leads them to immoral ends.
Jill, hold on a sec. We've got to take a quick break. We'll talk more in just a moment. Jill Jacobson is with us. She's a law student, third-year law student, which means the end of the line, I believe, at BC Law in the greater Boston area. We'll talk more in just a moment on WTIC.
It's the Todd Feinberg Show, live from the NJ Diet Studios on WTIC News Talk 1080.
Jill Jacobson is a law student. She's also studied international relations. She's all over the place in terms of having pockets of unique insights and background. So, Jill, it's great to have you here. What else do you feel like people should know? Because we are concerned about what's going on in education. We see it all the time. We talk about it all the time here on WTIC, but we don't have the firsthand contact with it. Our sense is that there's a runaway ideology that's taken hold of the schools and the education system, whether it's public education, whether it's the college level, and that it's, in a sense, been kidnapped away from the platform of American values that older folks like us went to school with. What's your take on that?
I think in part it does have to do with what goes on in school in terms of lack of diverse faculty, but perhaps more importantly, it starts before the education process even begins. It actually starts in admissions, because increasingly admissions offices, particularly in the Ivy League, but at elite institutions all over the country, prioritize social activism from potential applicants. So no longer are universities a representative sample of students with top GPAs and test scores. They're rather a representative sample of 17-year-olds who display frequent social activism, which I think is a very, very important part of the equation here.
So as an extracurricular activity, if I were applying to college, I would want to put on, if I was dragged off the highway that I was blocking because I was protesting subject X. Is that the type of thing you're talking about? That helps you?
Exactly. And while community engagement in general, I think we would all say is a good thing, zealous social activism at such a young age is a little different, because it seems to be a proxy for sort of lack of intellectual curiosity and overconfidence in your views. I mean, I can say that I surely have changed my opinion on fundamental issues since the age of 17. But when you screen for people's views at that early of an age, they're rarely going to change because they've just been rewarded for them.
But hang on, if we meld into that situation, the scenario that you're painting for us, the fact that the free exchange of ideas is no longer encouraged. The ideas that are encouraged are the ones that match the official look at things that you're describing, the schools imbuing into the student body. So you're not coming from a place where you've heard all the ideas.
No, I think, in fact, quite the opposite. When you reward students for certain social activism via admissions, and then they enter environments where professors tend to share those views, they're only encouraged, and they're rarely given an opportunity to question for themselves if they still believe that, if they should believe it, and what are created are ideological pressure cookers.
Any signs of hope in all this from your perspective?
I think so, yeah. I think the private sector is a real avenue for change. These universities are businesses. They have to make money. And if the value of a degree from these schools is no longer what it was, I think they will be forced to change. We're seeing it in the face of these comments regarding the Hamas attacks. There are lots of donors who have withdrawn funds. Business leaders like Bill Ackman have said that they are not going to hire students who are making these statements. So the private sector definitely is a canary in the coal mine, I think, for what might finally force universities to change.
Well, kids are going to be caught in the center of this.
They certainly will. I think, revolutionary ideas on college campuses have long been cool. I don't think that will ever change. But what can change is returning academia to a place where they can at the very least debate them and change their minds.
So we found you, Jill, because you had an op-ed piece in the New York Post last week. You want to tell folks about that?
Certainly. So my op-ed with my co-author, Rachel Chu, who is also a law student at Georgetown Law, we discussed the responses to the Hamas attacks, and we posit the reasons for why they might be, and pitch private sector change as the real hope for academia.
Jill Jacobson is a contributor to an organization called Young Voices, and they're pushing her and other people like her out to make their voices known. And it's good, Jill, because we get a chance to talk directly to somebody who's got firsthand experience with all this stuff. So we appreciate your time. Is there? Do you have a website or anything you want to push people towards?
I am Jill C. Jacobson on Twitter, and I routinely post the articles that I write on that platform.
All right. Jill, thanks for your time. It's great to talk with you. Appreciate it so much.
Great. Thank you so much.
All righty. That's Jill Jacobson. You can check her out in the New York Post. If you search just her name, I did it in Google News. I typed Jacobson or Jill Jacobson Post and popped right up. So you do that as well if you want to read her column.